In this video, we take a look at the concept of data validation. Validation is checking data inputted by the user meets specific requirements or rules before processing. There are 5 validation checks which you need to be aware of for GCSE. The first is a type check. Was data entered of the correct data type? For example, if a program is expecting a number, but a character is input instead, it will likely crash. The programmer can resolve this by working with inputs as strings rather than casting them to numbers. For example, here we have the code choice equals int input enter your choice. This is not the best way of programming this because the program will crash if it cannot convert the input to an integer. It would be better to program it like this instead. A range check. Was the data entered in the correct range? For example, if a quantity is to be entered, then the minimum value must be 1. There is often an upper range too, so perhaps the input must be restricted for between 1 to 10. Presence check. The user might not enter any data at all. There may be certain required fields, for example, entering your email address when using online forms before continuing. How will your program cope with no data being entered? Will the input be treated as a null or empty string or as a 0? A format check. Some data needs to be entered in the correct format. An obvious example is a date, and you could enter this in a number of formats, for example, 2 digits for the day, 2 for the month and 4 for the year. Postcodes and item codes often have specific formats that need to be adhered to. These can be checked for processing. And finally, a length check. Some data items must be a specific number of characters or over a specific minimum number of characters. Barcodes are 13 digits, for example, and passwords are often required to be at least 6 characters or more. By using input validation techniques, a programmer can make their program more robust, more user-friendly, and prevent further errors occurring. Here is a quick summary of the 5 data validation techniques we've gone through. Pause the video and take some notes. So let's actually focus in on the PLS now and look at the list of expected validation methods you might need to use in the Paper 2 on-screen exam. There's length check, presence check, range check and pattern check. We're actually going to look at how you might code some of those up in Python in exam conditions. So first let's do a length check. So I've written a bit of code here. You can see I've set a Boolean variable called parseMinLength and I've set that to false. And I'm saying while this variable is false, ask the user to enter a password. And my user has entered word, W-O-R-D. I'm then using the string command covered in a previous video to say, is the length of password, leng password, less than 8? Well, it is less than 8 because word has 4 characters. So we print your password must be at least 8 characters long. Because we're inside the while loop and parseMinLength is still false, we'll go back to the beginning of the while loop. And we ask the user again to please enter a new password. This time they enter password. And of course, when I check, is password less than 8? It's not less than 8, it's actually 8 characters, so it jumps to the else part and it prints thank you for entering a new password. It also now sets parseMinLength to true because the password has met the minimum length conditions. So when we go back to the start of the while loop, it won't keep repeating them to enter a password. So there's a simple way there of a Boolean, a while loop and an if statement that we can implement a length check. Obviously there are other methods you could use too. So we do a very similar thing here for a presence check. So a presence check is essentially saying, has the data actually even been entered? So we're again going to set pass min length to false, and we're going to enter our while loop and say, please enter a new password. The only thing we're changing here is saying if the password is an empty string. So if what they've entered is an empty string, which they have done here, they've just pressed enter, it prompts them to enter a new password. We haven't changed our Boolean variable to true, so we'll go back to the start of the while loop and we'll ask them to enter a password again. This time they have entered some text. So now the second part of the if statement will be executed. Thank you for entering a new password. Of course, it's perfectly acceptable to combine multiple validation methods. And in the exam, you might get a slightly more complex question that asks you to combine a presence and a length check. So we want to prompt the user if they enter no password at all, and we want to give them a different prompt if they do enter a password, but it's less than 8 characters. So you can see here how I've combined the code from the previous two examples to first check if the password is blank, and if it's not, then to check if it's less than 8 characters. Depending what they type in depends what message they get back. You can trace through the output on the screen and the code as well to see how it works. The next one is a range check. So is the data within a required range? So I've set again a Boolean variable called username valid, and that's set to false. And then I say while this variable is false, ask them to enter a username, and they've simply entered capital C. Now in my program, I'm requiring the username entered to be between 2 to 8 characters long. So I say if the length of the username variable is less than 2 or it's greater than 8, then I know it falls outside this range. So I print to the user, your username must be between 2 to 8 characters. Just as before, we go back to the while loop and we ask them to enter another username. Now they've entered Craig Sargent. Again, this is greater than 8 characters, so the first part of the if statement triggers and they're told to try again. The while loop continues to operate, and notice how with many of these validation techniques we're using a while loop because it's an example of a condition controlled loop. It's going to keep prompting the user to try again until the condition is true. Now they've typed in an acceptable username, it's Craig S, so that's 6 characters long, so that's between 2 to 6. So now when we check the if statement, we jump to the second part. Thank you for entering a new username. And we mustn't forget to set our Boolean username valid to true, which means the while loop will not continue to execute and will stop asking them to enter a new username. Now this last one is a pattern check, and it's a little more complex, and I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing it. So a pattern check is a validation method that you write that checks that data matches the required format. Now in my example, I expect the required format to be 5 alphanumeric characters, and only 5, of which the first 2 must be letters and the last 3 must be numbers. So just like before, I'm saying product code valid equals false, and while it's false, I'm going to ask the user to enter a product code. They've entered 5435. Well, first of all, I say if the length of the product code is 5, and it's not, they haven't even entered the correct length of the product code. So I can skip everything else. I check at the bottom there. If product code is false, I give them a prompt. And the prompt is being helpful this time. It's letting them know the product code must be 2 letters followed by 3 numbers and gives them an example. Product code is still false, so we go back to the top of the while loop and we ask the user one more time to try again. So they've entered NH%45. Well, this time the length of the product code is 5 characters long. So now what I need to do is check whether the first 2 characters are letters and the last 3 are numbers. Here you can see I've used 2 for loops to do that. The first for loop is going from index 0 to 1, and it's storing the first 2 letters of the string into the variable char part. So that extracts n and h and puts it in char part, and you can see that down the bottom. There's a similar for loop that then starts at the second index and goes up to the end of product code, and that stores in the variable numpart. So numpart now contains %45. I've basically used two for loops to extract the first two alphanumeric characters and the last three alphanumeric characters and store them in separate variables. Now I can use one of the string commands we introduced in a previous video. I can say, is char part full of alphabetic characters, and at the same time, is numpart full of numeric digits? Well, you can see it passes true on the char part, but false on the num part. I need both these to be true because it's an AND statement. So again, they're entered in invalid product code, and we're going to ask the user to try another time. This time the user enters 74583. Again, it's 5 characters long. I extract the first 2 and put it in char part, and the next 3 and put them in num part, and I ask again, is char part alphabetic? Well, it's not, it's got numbers in, so that's failed. Is num part digits? Well, it is, so that's passed. But again, we can't have a fail and a pass. Both of these have to be true, they both have to have passed. So again, the users fail to enter a valid product code. So one more time, I give them the instructions and I ask them for another product code. This time they've entered BN123. Well, this one's going to work, as we can tell. We've extracted the first 2 characters, that's B and N, that's in char part. We extract the last 3, that's 1, 2, 3, and they've gone in num part. Now this if statement is going to work. Char part is alpha. Well, that's true because char part contains just letters. And num part is digit. Well, that's also true because num part contains 1, 2 and 3. So both parts of the AND statement are true, so they've finally entered a valid product code. We print thank you for entering a valid product code, and we set product code valid to true, which means we'll stop going around the while loop and we'll stop asking the user to enter in product codes. Now here's an alternative version which also works, and this version avoids using for loops in favour of something known as string slicing, which you can see highlighted on the screen. String slicing neatly extracts the parts of the code into the variables char part and num parts without the need to go round for loops. Now, string slicing is not actually supported in the PLS, so you won't be expected to use it in the exam, but this would be a valid way of performing a pattern check, and indeed it results in a much neater and more efficient solution, and if you used it you would be credited with full marks. So that's the theory content of the video covered. We're just going to spend a little bit of time talking about the programming language subset. If you've heard this before, you can skip the rest of this video. Otherwise, it's definitely worth a quick watch. So the exam board at EDEXCEL have released a document that they call the programming language subset, which you can see here on the right. This document specifies which parts of Python 3 are required in order that the assessment can be undertaken with confidence. Students familiar with everything in this document will be able to access all parts of the Paper 2 on-screen assessment. The exam board will not go beyond the scope of this document when setting you any questions in the Paper 2 exam. Any students who do successfully use more complex methods, which are not included in the document, will still, however, be awarded marks. Further to this, you will see here from the front of the exam paper that you are actually going to be supplied with a printed and an electronic copy of the PLS during your Paper 2 exam. Well, if this document outlines everything you need to know in order to program in Python during the exam, and you can be guaranteed that you can answer all the questions using all the techniques in this document for full marks, then you might as well get used to using it now. Ask for a copy from your teacher and have it as a reference guide at all times throughout your GCSE course. It will be invaluable.
you.